Do you love spy books, movies, and TV? Then the Spybrary podcast is for you. Since 2017, host Shane Whaley and Spybrary field agents around the world dispatch reviews and interviews with authors, historians, and fellow spy fans. We discuss everything from John le Carré, Len Dayton, Paul Vidic, Graham Greene, Mick Herron, Charles Cumming, Ben McIntyre, and many more. Spybrary is available on all good podcast apps and at spybrary.com.
Welcome to episode 215 of the Spybrary podcast. Today, we serve you with another installment of our super popular series, Dead Drop 5. This is where our guest is allowed to request 5 books and several luxury items to be stashed in their dead drop behind the Iron Curtain. Today's guest is Oliver Webb Carter. Now, having studied ancient history and classical archaeology at the University of Warwick, he also worked in the City of London for nearly 2 decades before deciding to return to his first love. And I know it's the love of many of us that listen to this show, history. Oliver is the editor and a founder of Aspects of History. We'll talk a little bit more about his work in this conversation, but they produce online magazines, interviews, articles, book reviews. Love the podcast, by the way. If you enjoy history, get on it. It's a smorgasbord. You can pick and choose. I just listened to a great one on Berlin, as well as their interview with Michael Smith. And the cool thing about what we do is there's so much in a book that these interviews rarely are the same content. And Oliver definitely got to some topics that I just didn't have time for. I had to prioritize 45 minutes with an author, what we're going to cover. So do check out Aspects of History. I'm a big fan. Check out their podcast on their website. All the show notes will be at spybrary.com/215. So without further ado, let's welcome Oliver Webb Carter. Welcome to Spybrary, episode 215, to Oliver Webb Carter. How are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks a lot, Shane, for having me on.
It's an absolute pleasure. Before we dive into your picks today, which I am really excited to hear about, can you share with our listeners who may not be familiar with Aspects of History what it is you do and what it is you offer?
Yeah, sure. So Aspects of History is a magazine and website, and we have a podcast as well dedicated to history and historical fiction. So just going into that a little bit more, I mean, we set up in December 2020. We launched in December 2020, our first issue of the magazine. And really the idea is to connect readers with authors. So what that means is for the magazine, each issue contains articles, interviews, short stories, because it's historical fiction as well, and book reviews. And the idea is that readers will read an article written by an author who's got a book out. They'll read the review, and if that tickles their interest, they'll buy the book. And the magazine and the website, they're always featuring these articles and other things like that all around when the book is published. So the idea is to capitalize on the publication date and help authors sell more books. And that's basically what we're there for. So we offer authors platforms, and then they get access to the magazine and the website and the podcast as well.
As your name suggests, you cover aspects of history, and that's very wide-ranging. And you do cover espionage. I've just listened to your epic interview with Michael Smith, author of The Real Special Relationship, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And what I was trying to say on Twitter about that, particularly to our Spybarian community, is you might have heard our interview, but go check out Oliver's, because he put 3 years of research into that book. And as you said on your interview, which I loved, is like every chapter could have been a book. And as podcasters, we only get 45 minutes to an hour. None of us want to do Joe Rogan 4-hour style interviews, but we could have done with Mick because there was so much in that book. But I will warn our listeners that we often joke at Spybrary that, put your credit cards away because you're going to get a ton of spy book recommendations. And it is absolutely, you've done me already. There's 2 or 3 books that I bought, and the interview you had, and I know a lot of our Spybarians are, like me, also fascinated by Berlin, and you had a really good interview on Berlin with Barney. Is it Barney?
Barney White-Spunner, the former general.
Yes. And I had to take a look. I've got a little section of my Spybrary, which is Berlin focused, and I have a lot of fiction and non-fiction. I'm like, have I got that one? I don't think I have. So I was just like, okay, Oliver's cost me money that I didn't plan on spending.
Yeah, I did keep in mind the Scribarian's credit card when I picked one of my books. So I'm hoping I'll save you some money.
Fantastic. Well, Aspects of History is at aspectsofhistory.com. I will add all the resources we mentioned today at spybury.com/215. So let's kick off. You're being sent to Behind the Iron Curtain. You can ask for 5 books from your handler. What's pick number 1?
Well, this is great stuff. I mean, I always find great spy stories almost it's like the perfect football match or the perfect cricket match. You have to have a few requirements. And I think being behind the Iron Curtain is a vital one. However, for my first pick, I'm actually going pre-Second World War. And it's Ashenden by Somerset Maugham. And so it's set during the First World War. And I picked this because I read the stories when I was quite young as well. So an impressionable age. And it also whilst I'm fascinated by espionage and spying and agents and running agents and tradecraft and all that sort of thing, I just adore. I'm also aware that there's something of the farce to it. And Ashenden captures that. There are mistakes being made left, right, and center, because when you've got human beings, that's what happens. And in the Ashenden stories, Ashenden himself is a writer. He's based in Geneva in Switzerland, and he's an amateur. He doesn't really know what he's doing. So I love that and that will reappear with another choice I have. I'm always rather attracted by the sort of farcical nature of espionage and mistakes and people accidentally, I don't know, naming the wrong agent, things like that. I'm sure I listened to your very good interview with Nigel West, and I think he mentioned that, there are a number of sort of spies or agents who've rather enhanced their spying duties that they've done. They've exaggerated or even made up stuff, in the past. And I find that fascinating, very funny, and I'm sure it happens even today.
Yeah, and then you also got the other extreme where I've tried to interview certain people, I can't say any names for this show, and they've come back and said no, but too close to home. So there are people who don't want to go on anything spy related because they might have done a bit of ducking and diving in the past. And then you got others who can't wait to tell you. And it's interesting. How did you discover Ashenden? How did it come up on your radar? Do you remember?
Yes, I do. Well, when I was about 17, 18, actually, I just left school. I was about 18. I went to work as an archaeologist in Central America. And I took with me, back in 95, this was, so, no mobile phones or certainly no internet. And so I just took a bunch of books with me. And my mother gave me Of Human Bondage, which is this epic sort of semi-autobiographical novel that Somerset Maugham wrote. And I found when you read books like that, it's an impressionable age, as I mentioned before, and you're in I was at quite a sort of vulnerable time in my life. I was on my own at 18. And this novel is all about a young man, similar age that I was, much of the novel is set in Paris, and he gets his heart broken and stuff like that. So I became obsessed with the novel. It's not spy related at all, but that's meant that I was really into Somerset Maugham. And so he's a great writer of short stories. And actually the Ashenden stories, one can read them almost as each chapter being a short story. And I mentioned actually the fact that Scribarians might be interested in this particular book because you can pick it up for just over £1, I think, on Amazon for Kindle. So the credit card will be safe for this particular title. But yeah, it was really through Somerset Maugham, the love of Somerset Maugham. He's written brilliant short stories set in Southeast Asia as well. He's just a wonderful writer, really.
What do you think sets Ashenden apart from others in the genre?
Well, I've tended not to read too much. I'm not aware of too many stories out there set during the First World War. And so what you get with that is, I think it's a slightly more innocent time. There are, of course, betrayals and, there's murder involved in the stories, but it does seem slightly more innocent. I think that's partly because Ashenden himself is almost, if it's even possible to be an innocent spy working for the British government, But what springs to mind is there's this wonderful story involving a woman who gets involved. I don't know if you've read Ashenden,
Yes,
Shane.
I have.
There's the wonderful female dancer who's traveling through Britain, and she has an Indian sort of agent provocateur who's fallen in love with her. And for much of the novel, she's treating Ashenden as a sort of skivvy and talking about how she's so in love with this wonderful man and she won't betray him. And right at the end, I don't want to ruin it for anyone who hasn't read it, but right at the end, this is just a brilliant sentence that finishes this particular episode in the Ashenden stories, that it's so real, it's so human, but there's an innocence to it as well that I think that does, for me, it sets apart. I mean, we're going to probably talk about Le Carré and Le Carré. I think there are very few innocent people, or if there are, they normally come a cropper. But with the Ashenden stories, I think it's because of, it's obviously it's not set during the Cold War, which I think gives it a sort of different slant to your average spy story, which I think the perfect one has to be, you know, we're behind the wall in East Berlin right now, aren't we? So I think it needs that kind of Cold War element to it to make a perfect spy story. But Ashenden has this kind of different era feel to it.
But I've loved that you read other books and other works by the author.
Well, yeah, Somerset Maugham, he was quite a strange individual. I did some reading up about him, and he was desperate to live for as long as he could. I did some work in Switzerland many years ago, and I actually met I think the second or third husband of his daughter. So Somerset Maugham was his father-in-law, and I asked him about Somerset Maugham, and he just said he was such a strange individual, such a strange man, didn't really know him very well at all. So he is I'd say a very unusual British writer who wrote many of his novels are set outside of Britain, a lot of them based in The Razor's Edge is a great novel, Cakes and Ale, that one's set in Britain, and his short stories set in Southeast Asia are wonderful. So yes, it opens, I think if you read Ashenden, it will open up a world of just fantastic stories.
Brilliant. I love that suggestion, because you said the atmosphere and the setting is very unique in terms of when it actually took place. What's your second ask?
Well, my second book, I think, is a non-fiction one, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And I've only picked one non-fiction book. Well, it is a story, but I've only picked one non-fiction. It's an account of, it's always sort of hyperbole to say the greatest spy of all. But King Philby, the story of King Philby is just so fascinating for me. And I've developed a bit of an obsession with the Cambridge spy ring. And I went through a sort of roller coaster ride of whether I sympathized with them or condemned them. And this book I'm talking about is A Spy Among Friends by Ben McIntyre. I think it was published about 10 years ago. And it reads, I say it's nonfiction, and it is, but it reads like a novel. And I mean, they made a TV show of it recently with Guy Pearce and Damian Lewis, which I'm afraid I didn't like.
Oh, really?
Did you see it?
I did, and I did enjoy it, but I worry we might spend an hour talking about TV rather than books. So let's put that one for another episode, because I'd love to have a panel discussion on that.
Well, yeah. Just the story of Philby, particularly, you know, the juxtaposition with Nicholas Elliot, this MI6 mastermind, and how I think the fascinating, I'm going to mention another book, The Pigeon Tunnel, the Le Carré. I don't know, it's not really an autobiography, is it? It's just sort of essays of his life.
It's essays which they have turned or are turning into a documentary movie. His son was announced last week, so excited for that.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah. Well,
he talks about Nicholas Elliot and meeting Elliot and asking him, and I think this is in actually the afterword or the foreword of A Spy Among Friends. Le Carré asked whether Elliot or MI6 could have sort of taken care of Philby. And I love that the response of Elliot is that it's just not the sort of thing you do, gentlemen. And just that world of White's, the club in St. James's, the bar being a recruiting ground for all these MI6 spies, and the fact that you could rise to head of counter-espionage and be a Soviet spy. The story just I know you've said this many times before, but non-fiction can be stranger than fiction.
It really is, because if you read that, he's just strolling in and out with his briefcase as if that would happen. It's like, yeah, it did, and it cost many lives.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. I mean, it's always interesting to know you want to know how big a betrayal it was. It was interesting speaking to Mick Smith about, I know who we had on the podcast, who writes fantastically about this whole sort of Cold War era. And Kim Philby being more reputational damage than anything else. I mean, I guess it's linked to what I was saying earlier about this sort of human element. One of the other novels, maybe I'll get on to what I wanted to talk about with the sort of human element. But it seems that when you're using human beings, you're just so open to betrayal. And so, that seems to be quite a high risk factor, particularly in a period just after the war when basically you just had to go to a good public school and be a member of a club and you were kind of in.
Absolutely. Have you read Frederick Forsyth's The Fourth Protocol?
No, I haven't read that.
Well, the reason I bring up The Fourth Protocol, it's that history, real life blending into fiction, because it starts off with a letter. So it's set in the 80s, but it's a letter written by Philby, which is basically his analysis of the UK and what a weak position it's in, and his analysis on Thatcher. And it's purely fictional, which is kind of fun what Freddie Forsyth has done. But for those of us who love our history, it is a very intriguing part of, and it's a great start to that book.
Did you hear the recording of Philby a number of years ago was released, where they had a recording of him briefing or lecturing Stasi agents in East Germany? And his advice was, if you were ever captured, just deny, deny, deny. And it's so interesting to me because initially when he was questioned, that's all he did, and it worked. I mean, you can see on YouTube the clip of him having the press round to his mother's flat. And I think that MI6 still use that clip to train their agents in how to lie so convincingly. And in it, Philby is just, of course, I'm not a spy. And he is. It's creepy.
It is. And I'm such a geek. I actually walked to they filmed that or recorded it at his mother's flat in Kensington. And I took a walk there, and, you're outside this building and there's no plaque on it or anything. I think it was actually empty because it was the basement flat. And I'm just like, wow, the history that happened here.
We should lobby for a blue plaque for Kim Philby.
Yeah, I'm not sure the intelligence service would be too keen on that one. But someone pointed out to me, and I think it might have even been, was it Charlotte Philby, his granddaughter? I forget now, that if you look at his tie in that video clip of him saying he's not a spy, there's double crosses on the tie. And it's like, was that intentional? Or was it just a random tie he picked up that morning?
That's interesting because he's wearing, I think, a pinstripe suit as well.
Yes.
Which makes for, with the double crosses, that makes for quite a busy piece of wardrobe there. So I wonder, you're right. I think maybe the double crosses was a clue.
One of the questions I have for you is, if I could get you in the Spybury time machine to meet Kim Philby, what would be the question you would ask him? What would be the number one question you'd ask Philby?
I don't know, because as I've got older, I've become less persuaded by his idealism. And I've become more persuaded by the motivation being more around his sort of character. I think he was addicted to secrecy. And so I could ask him whatever I wanted. Unlikely I'd get a straight answer, but I think I would ask him something around, was this more about having secrets that no one else knew rather than being a committed communist?
Yeah. The game.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, no,
yeah, because when he arrived in Moscow, the Soviets didn't really trust him. And he led rather an aimless life. And all for that, I mean, I'm convinced that I've become more convinced. And the book, Spy Among Friends, is very much leads you to that conclusion that it was more around an addiction to secrecy.
I mean, it just amazes me how much he drank, but still kept his secrets.
Yes.
I mean, a couple of pints in, I'm telling everybody everything.
I know. I would be a hopeless spy as well. I mean, it's interesting because I was going to pick spoilers for Ollie's Dead Drop 5, but I was going to pick a Bond novel, but I didn't. But had I picked a Bond novel, I probably would have picked Goldfinger. And in Goldfinger, he's stuck in the cell in Kentucky.
Yeah.
And he drinks an entire bottle of bourbon. And I don't know about you, Shane, but if I drank an entire bottle of bourbon, there's no way I'd be able to negotiate my way out of a prison cell and keep track of what was being planned.
It's formidable. And the same, I believe it was Live and Let Die, where he has to swim out to some island to capture the villain. And he goes, I'm on a fitness regime now. I'm down to 20 cigarettes a day.
Yeah, I was just reading Thunderball where, early on he's going to the health spa and the MI6's doctor notes he smokes 60 cigarettes a day.
Crazy, isn't it? And then because I often think, wow, can you imagine a night out with Philby, McLean and Burgess? I mean, you'd be hungover for weeks.
Think Burgess particularly, another fascinating character, actually, Burgess. One of my favorite sort of TV depictions of Burgess is the Alan Bates short film written by Alan Bennett called A Gentleman Abroad. Have you seen that?
I have not. No, I will have to dig that out.
Absolutely wonderful. It was all based around a true event. Yeah. And I know we're going off on a tangent, Shane, so please indulge me.
You're welcome to it. It's Dead Drop 5.
Great stuff. Well, so around about 55, the Royal Shakespeare Company go to Moscow. And the leading actress, and I forget her name, which is a terrible mistake, but she was performing, I think it was Twelfth Night. Anyway, she was in her dressing room, and at halftime, in smashed this drunken Brit who then proceeded to eat, I think he ate raw garlic or something. And it was just a disgusting individual, completely drunk. And it was Guy Burgess. And so he invited the actress to his apartment the next day for lunch, where he ate tomatoes with, once again, raw garlic placed in each segment of the tomato, which I assume was a sort of delicacy, given that I doubt there was much in the way of culinary delights in Moscow at the time. But it's this hilarious story, and he has her, I don't want to sort of reveal the full story because your listeners should check it out, but he has her measure him up for a suit, which she then obtains for him with the tailors in Savile Row. And it's Alan Bennett as well. So Alan Bennett captures the kind of humor, but also there's a lot of pathos with it as well. And so it's an extraordinary TV play.
I'll track that down. I'll link to it in the show notes, which everyone can find at spybury.com/215. You're right about that clip where Philby addresses the Stasi officers in East Berlin. And what's really interesting from a historian's viewpoint, he sat next to Markus Wolf, who was head of the Stasi Foreign Intelligence, who was the man without a face. For many, many years, we didn't know what he looked like. And this is probably one of the smartest spies out there. Love that book if you haven't read it already, Man Without a Face, Markus Wolf. It just gives you the inner workings of how such a small intelligence agency was able to really punch above their weight. Bringing down Willy Brandt and various others. A pretty interesting individual. And the rumor is that, going back to Le Carré, that Carla in the Carla trilogy was based on Markus Wolf. Le Carré always denied it. But you never know with Le Carré. He's a bit mischievous, and it wouldn't surprise me. But going back to the McIntyre book, they're the ones I recommend to so many people, because you're right. He has that unique talent of writing narrative fiction in a way where you do pinch yourself and say, is this really not fiction? And all his books are like that. He has that real unique talent to bring it to life.
He does. There are a number of McIntyre books I've not read, actually, which are his early ones, which I'm fascinated by, about Nietzsche's sister in Argentina and things like that, which don't sound particularly riveting, but I think in the hands of McIntyre, they will be. And I know you've had him on here, haven't you, on Spybury?
Yes, Tim has interviewed him. Yeah, Tim Shipman interviewed him for us about his Colditz book.
Because I interviewed McIntyre for his Colditz book recently, and at the end, I had to sneak in a question about Philby.
Yeah.
And I asked him if do you think we've heard all there is to hear about Philby, or are there more secrets still to come? And in typical McIntyre fashion, he was, I'm convinced there are plenty more secrets out there. There's lots more to come. So, that's just so tempting. And, I know one of our, she'd be very good contact for you, actually, is writing a book about the Cambridge spy ring, and another one, but I think it comes from a different angle, and it sounds very interesting. And so, who knows if there are more secrets out there.
Are you on the hunt for your next thrilling spy read? Look no further. Spybury contributor and Sunday Times chief political commentator Tim Shipman has curated a list of his top 125 spy authors ranked. With Tim's vast experience and expertise in politics and spy thrillers, you can trust his judgment on the best spy authors of all time. This list includes both classic and modern writers, making it the ultimate guide for any spy fan. But wait, there's more. Tim also recommends which book to try first from each author, and he shares his favourite book from each of them too, so you can dive right into the best of the best. Ready to get your hands on Tim's list? Head over to spybury.com/top125 to grab your free copy now. Don't miss out on the ultimate spy reading list. Visit spybury.com/top125 today.
It was interesting you brought up the TV adaptation because a couple months ago I was in London and I got to see Damian Lewis. Apparently he's turned musician now and he was performing a gig up in Brick Lane, and I went up there and I was able to get him to sign my record. But what was interesting was one of the songs was called Don't Judge a Man by His Umbrella. And when he announced it, he said, "Oh, this is all about spies." I'm like, "Hey, up." So I asked him and he said, "Oh, do you know that was the title of Nicholas Elliott's autobiography?" I said, "No, I did not know that, Damian." So clearly he had done a lot of research into the character. I've gone online and that book is several $100s if you can find it. So, and there's not a Kindle version anywhere. So I'll have to keep my eyes open at flea markets and secondhand stores to get my hands on that one.
Strange individual, that Nicholas Elliot, actually. Yeah, I think, again, that's someone who, I know he's a key character in Spy Among Friends, but I wonder if there's a biography there on him as well.
Definitely. All right. So this is always a danger with Dead Drop 5. I feel like I should give an hour for each book.
Yeah. Am I overrunning already?
No, we're all good.
Please forgive me.
No, we're all good. We're all good. So what's your third selection?
My third selection, well, we've been mentioning Le Carré. So, and this is really difficult to pick Le Carré. And I've loved your site and the list of Le Carré that Tim Shipman does, you know, the sort of ranking them all and mine. And so it was so difficult to pick a Le Carré, but I think the one that is my favorite is A Perfect Spy, because I guess it's something that I've mentioned before, so I'm going to bang on about it again, but it is that kind of human element to it that obviously is present in the Carla trilogy, but I think in A Perfect Spy, obviously the semi-autobiographical nature of it, I think a lot of it, you know, whenever I read novels, I read so much nonfiction now, Shane. Just reading a novel now is a real pleasure. Just because of the nature of the job, it's inevitably nonfiction. But so when I do read a novel, now I've been rereading A Perfect Spy again, and I've got a special reissued hardback versions of Le Carré. So I've got the hardback version of A Perfect Spy. And it's just, I kind of almost identify a little bit with Magnus Pym. The boarding school, not seeing your father, that kind of thing, very much I can relate to. And so the fact that the father is such a rogue who, when you're in the presence of in the novel, you almost like him, but he's doing such harm to his son. And then, of course, Magnus Pym. Are we allowed to do spoilers?
Yeah, I think we can. That book came out, in the 80s? So
It did. Yes.
People have had long enough.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess the book's title is almost a spoiler, but the character of Pym, who, you know, similar to Philby in a way, in that his whole life is based on betrayal, that he doesn't even know himself and doesn't even know who he is himself. I don't relate to that, don't get me wrong, but it's that side of the novel that I think Le Carré gets to the heart of. This is going to sound a bit pretentious, but the human condition more than, I guess, his other novels, I think. Yeah, so I think A Perfect Spy is just, the perfect spy novel.
Yeah, it's such a stunning novel, and it's one I keep meaning to go back and read, but it's a lengthy novel. And as you know, being a podcaster, you want to read the books of your guests. So I find that's the only downside to producing Spybury is I don't necessarily get that space to go back and reread stuff, but that's definitely up there. And I remember when I read it, I struggled with it a little bit. So way before Spybury, I started Le Carré. It took me a long time to get into him, to be honest. Like, you know, it's funny. I used to read a lot of nonfiction up until my 40s. So kind of the opposite to you in a way. And I remember picking up a Le Carre saying, okay, I finally got into it. It was a small town in Germany. I finally got it. And then I went, okay, I'm going to read them all in order. And Perfect Spy,
sorry to interrupt you. You've just mentioned a small town in Germany, which I love so much, that captures that bureaucracy, the comedy you get in British bureaucracy. So I just wanted to mention that. It's just extraordinary in that novel.
And a lot of that was based on his own experiences of being out in Bonn, as a diplomat. That he was observing a lot of this. I think Len Dayton's also very, very good at that. We'll go on to that.
Le Carre taught my father at Eton.
Wow.
French and German, I think.
Yeah.
So my father is a Le Carre obsessive, and he has all the hardbacks at home. My father was in the army and he was stationed in Berlin. He wrote a letter to Le Carre mentioning something he had noticed about after the wall came down. Some of the graves of Germans that were shot or were killed when trying to get over the wall or get across the Iron Curtain. And they were placed in unmarked graves. But after the wall came down, relatives had put, I think, ribbons or roses on these unmarked graves to signify who they were. And my dad wrote to Le Carre, and apparently he included it in his novel. And I was a novel written in, I think it was the one in 93 that came out. Is that Absolute Friends?
Now that's my favorite Le Carre, so I should know that. Absolute Friends came out early 2000s, but why not add it in the show notes? Take a look when we're done, and I'll add that to the show notes for listeners, because that's a really cool story.
Yeah. Well, I think just Le Carre is, I really wanted to pick The Spy Came In From the Cold.
Yes.
Because it's so fantastic, but perhaps I can use that later.
If someone come up to you and said, hey, Oliver, I hear a lot about this Le Carre guy. What do you recommend? Would you give them Perfect Spy or A Spy Came From the Cold first?
I would give them A Spy Came In From the Cold first. Yeah. Because, as you say, Perfect Spy is a big novel, but it also, I think it helps to be in Le Carre's world to read A Perfect Spy. It just gives you that kind of, even the tradecraft, it gives you that kind of knowledge that just will make the novel better than it would be if you hadn't read any. That's not to say it's not a standalone novel. Of course it is. But it's Spy Came In From the Cold. I think it's just so gripping and so thrilling that, yeah, that would be my first. But I think the first one I read was A Murder of Quality, which is just a straight detective story, isn't it?
Yes, it really is.
Yeah.
You just get the feeling he didn't know if he was going to write spy or crime, murder mystery, and thank God he picked spy.
Yeah. I find his later Le Carre, they almost sort of alternate between great and not so great.
I agree. It's like when you just said the book came out in the early 90s, they all kind of meld into one for me, his later books, I have to say.
Well, I love The Russia House, though.
Yes.
I absolutely love that. I think it gets slightly panned. And I don't get that. I just think I love the characters in it. Barney Blair is just a wonderful character.
Well, you mentioned earlier on about your love of short stories. Secret Pilgrim I love because they're all short stories. And there's a
Ned.
thread. Yes, Ned. Yeah.
Yeah, another great character.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're great, those.
Did you ever watch the TV adaptation of Perfect Spy with Peter Egan in the lead?
I did. I don't think it is a huge success, but there are some standout. I think the early episodes are very good, with Pym's growing up. Ray McAnally, who plays the father, is just brilliant. Everything he's in is just fantastic. So I just think it kind of dwindled off a little bit towards the latter episodes, but I haven't seen it in ages, so maybe it's worth another look.
Yeah, I've got it here somewhere on DVD, and I watched it once. And I enjoyed it, being a Le Carre fan, but you wonder today what the Ink Factory, which is the Le Carre production, what they would do with, because I love what they've done with Night Manager and Little Drummer Girl. It's like, okay, have a go at Perfect Spy. But
yeah,
we live in hope.
Yeah, it's a fantastic story.
Yeah.
So I think it would, that TV series came out very soon after it was the novel was written.
Oh, really?
I think it came out in 87 and I think the novel was published in 86. So yeah, it's interesting that it came out so quickly.
It is. Okay, selection number 4.
Number 4. Now, so I've kind of mentioned that of course, having the Cold War very important in a spy novel, but I wanted to pick a a story set in Northern Ireland, because Northern Ireland to me is so underreported, and I don't think that we in England and concentrate as much as we should, even today, on the troubles in Northern Ireland and where Northern Ireland is today. But I picked a novel called The Ultras by Owen McNamee. And I was umming and ahhing between this and a non-fiction book by Peter Taylor, who's written a book called Operation Chiffon, which is all about the intelligence. War is the wrong word, really. The intelligence behind the peace process since 72. But I went with The Ultras by McNamee because this story really does take you into the deepest horrors of the Troubles in a way that Operation Chiffon doesn't, even though that's a non-fiction. But The Ultras is all about Owen McNamee is an Irish writer who wrote Resurrection Man, is his most famous novel, which was about the Shankill Butchers, a set of basically serial killers who went around sectarian. It's pretty horrific.
Yeah.
Well, Ultras is not dissimilar to this, but the key about this is it's the difference with the Resurrection Man is there's a lot more espionage involved with the character of Robert Nairac, who is a real person, and he was in the Grenadier Guards, but he worked for an organization called 14 Intelligence Company, I think it was, which was similar to the SES, but involved a lot more intelligence work. And Nairac is a fascinating character. He was murdered by the IRA, and no one knows where his body was found. I think even the IRA don't know where it is now. And he was a public school boy, went to Ampleforth, and I think Oxford University, ends up in the Grenadier Guards. So, the most upper class or upper middle class trajectory. But he obviously had a talent for intelligence work, and he would go to Republican pubs and sing rebel songs alongside IRA paramilitaries. So he obviously liked going undercover, liked the thrill of being undercover. Now, this novel really gets to grips with what he is up to. And there is a collusion with loyalist paramilitaries. Now, I should say it's a novel. I don't think there's much historical evidence that Nairac was involved in this. I think it probably would be upsetting for Nairac's family to read this novel. It really does capture that kind of side of espionage in Northern Ireland where you have betrayal, no one knows who's working for whom. And then, of course, there's sort of tragic killing. I mean, most famously, the Miami show band massacre. So this story is not for the faint-hearted, but I think it's very effective in bringing you into that world in Northern Ireland.
So when was The Ultras published? Or what era was it set in? That's probably more important.
It's set in the late 70s.
Late 70s, right. So I was right in the thick of it.
Yeah, and it's that kind of depths of the Troubles. There were all sorts of nasty things happening around then, and there was collusion. It's around about when the SAS began what later was described as shoot to kill, although they would deny that that's what it was. There's a very good book by Mark Urban called Big Boys Rules. So it's around about when also the IRA became increasingly themselves sectarian in their targeting of people, and of course loyalist paramilitaries doing the same. So that era of the conflict where I don't think anyone came out looking too good.
Yeah. Have you read Harry's Game?
No, I haven't.
That's set in Northern Ireland as well. It's very, very revered in our spy community, but and apparently that was
I need to read that. I'm sounding like I'm not really a true spybarian here.
Oliver, honestly, believe you me, there are a ton of spy classics I haven't got to yet. It's the beauty of what we do. There's no finished road. It's continuous. And then we have wonderful authors that are writing today. So I keep delving into yesteryear as well, because there are so many great books written in the past. And then you get the stuff coming out now. It's I love it. I am not complaining. It just makes me broke.
Well, yeah, exactly. And now I'm worried about my own credit card. There I was thinking I was going to impact the credit card of Spybarians, and now it's now I've got two to read.
Harry's Game was well worth your time, and also there was a TV series made of it. It was a TV series, yes, with Ray Lonan, who was in Sandbaggers, plays the lead, and that's very well done.
Oh, okay. Fantastic. I shall check that out.
But read the book first, as always, right? Read the
Gerald
book.
Seymour's excellent, actually, isn't he?
He is. He is. And apparently I learned that that's part of a trilogy. I had no idea. I thought we were at lunch. I'm going to name drop for once on Spybury. We were at the Special Forces Club. One of our Spybury contributors invited us for lunch there. I was with Jason King, and King was telling us that there's 3 books. Because one of our guests who served in Ulster was saying he's read Harry Game like 20 times over, and he says one of the most realistic books about intel. You know, coming from someone who served, okay, that's pretty impressive.
I'm definitely going to check that out. I mean, Gerald Seymour's a really interesting character. I mean, one book that I would have liked to have picked to have been a top 10 would have been One Day in September, written by Simon Reeve, which later became a documentary, Oscar-winning documentary, all about the Munich Olympics massacre. And Gerald Seymour was an ITN reporter who was there at the time and reported on it. Yeah, it's, I mean, that whole Munich Olympics massacre then prompted a response from the Mossad, which is the subject of the film Munich. That's a fascinating tale about Mossad agents going on the rampage across Europe.
Yeah, I'll have to check that one out. I haven't read that one. See? You're giving my credit card the shakes in the bank there. Let's move on to pick number 5. What's your 5th and final pick for your Dead Drop 5, Oliver?
My final one is Our Man in Havana by Graham Greene, because this captures, in a way, part of how I view espionage when you're dealing with human beings, in that I'm convinced, even as I mentioned earlier, even today, I'm sure there are people exaggerating what they're doing and maybe even making things up. One might argue the technology makes that more difficult, or could it even make it easier? Who knows? But Our Man in Havana, I mean, it's Graham Greene, so it's just beautifully written. It is a story that set in Cuba. I don't know, I'm sure Spybrarians are very familiar with the story, but a wonderful character, Wormold, who's recruited by this absolute buffoon, Hawthorne, to become his agent in Cuba. And Wormold has no idea what he's doing, but he just makes things up as he goes along. And as we know, Le Carré rewrote it basically for The Tailor of Panama. But I think the fact that Graham Greene does this story in such a Graham Greene way, which you see so much in so many of the Greene novels, it just captures the sort of blithering idiots that probably you saw a lot more of in those days than one does now, although maybe not so sure about that. But these blithering idiots, when they are, tend to be upper class hierarchy in MI6. The film version is just brilliant as well. I should mention that, with Alec Guinness and Noel Coward, Ralph Richardson. And I think just the idea that one could string along a spy agency into thinking that they had a really good network in a far off land that they don't really know much about, I find that quite compelling. And even though it's a novel, I find it very realistic.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
It kind of captures where I see I almost feel like some sides of the espionage game with agents, I almost find it, maybe sometimes it's counterproductive and pointless. You see plenty of Kim Philbys. How many spies do we know who've turned? Surely having a spy agency makes it more of a risk than not having one. And, you saw, I don't know if you've seen the new film Oppenheimer, the Russians all got the nuclear secrets because of spying. I mean, it does, to me, show how the whole spy agency thing can almost be counterproductive. I think where you get GCHQ and the NSA, that's a bit different. That's obviously a little bit, there are fewer humans involved. It's more, data and encryption and stuff like that. But
my one hope is that we have some human intelligence. We have someone sat at Putin's table that's telling us what's going on. That's, you said you have NSA, GCHQ, the signal intelligence, but human is where it's at.
Yeah. But then how would you know he's on your side?
Exactly. No, you're right.
Yeah. He might be working for Putin, working for us, working for Putin.
There's a novel there somewhere.
But that's why it's so fascinating to us, isn't it?
It really is. And then you also think about the risks that person is taking. Because if you've read about Penkovsky and others, I mean, who would want to be a spy, Oliver? Really?
Well, it seems like people like Kim Philby wanted to be a spy. I mean, I can't imagine the stress probably led to all his drinking, but he seemed to love being a spy because he could have stopped after he was kind of exposed, but then he ends up in Beirut and he's at it again.
Incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
Incredible. But that's a very worthy pick, number 5. In fact, out of all 5 you've picked, there's only one I haven't read, so I'll be adding that to my shopping list. So The Ultras.
Oh, yes.
And the Taylor book. I'm a big fan of Peter Taylor as well. I'll jump on that too.
Oh, he's a wonderful guy, actually. Yeah. I was very fortunate to interview him the other day.
Oh, you did? Brilliant.
Yeah, talking about Operation Chiffon.
Brilliant. Let us know when that's out. It's
out already. I'll send you a link.
Oh, great. And I'll put that in today's show notes and get it out on Twitter.
Fantastic.
I knew you were going to cost me a ton of money. So as well as books, you're allowed a couple of items with you. You're allowed a piece of music or an album or a CD. Don't worry about this being behind the curtain. We don't have to keep it to pre-89. What music would you want to have given to you?
Well, I wasn't really sure what to pick. And then last night, my wife and I were watching Made of Stone, the Stone Roses documentary directed by Shane Meadows.
Okay.
And so it came out in 1989. So it's going to be The Stone Roses by the Stone Roses.
Marvelous. Have you read the novel called The Stone Roses?
No.
Sarah Gainham. No. Sarah Gainham. So she's, crikey, I don't want to go too long on this, but a writer of yesteryear, is a really fascinating history. I'll send you some things on it. But there's one of her books called The Stone Roses, which is very, very hard to get. It's a bit of a holy grail among librarians. And I've talked to Tim Shipman about that because he's the one that's a huge fan of her work. And, did they name the band after the book? Nobody really knows, but
I wish I had known about this and then I could have said, yes, that's exactly why I picked the album.
Exactly. I'll do some work in post-production, Oliver, don't worry.
Thank you.
What about some alcohol? If you're a drinker, what booze would you like to be placed for you in your dead drop?
Yeah, well, this is an easy one for me. I would take with me a bottle of Bushmills.
Good choice.
Yeah. It's got to be whiskey. I'm assuming it's January in East Berlin. It's cold. I need something to keep me warm.
Yeah, Bushmills will definitely help. You're allowed to have one luxury item. What would you take with you?
Well, I was thinking about this because I've got things that would be nice, like a watch or a pen or something. But then I was messing around in my old technology drawer and I found my 160 gig color iPod. With loads of music on it. It's even got Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy and Smiley's People on it.
Wow.
It was so just that and a pair of headphones will be my luxury item.
What a great pick. What a great pick. Now, if you could call up one spy, either fictional or real, to come and exfiltrate you because you've been rumbled, who would you pick?
Well, again, I was thinking about this probably a little bit too much, but I assumed that because I would be an incompetent spy, it's likely I would be in Slough House. So I would want Jackson Lamb to come and exfiltrate me because he's a wonderful character. And he's also, when it's his own people, he'll do anything he can to help. If I were not in Slough House, I wouldn't want him. It would only be if I were in Slough House, and as definite 100% certainty, I would be a slow horse. So Jackson Lamb would be my pick.
There's that great line, isn't it? They may be F-ups, but they're my F-ups.
Exactly.
It's great.
Yeah, exactly.
Out of all the books you've mentioned today, as this flap is on and you're being broken out of East Berlin, you can only grab one of those books that you've selected. Which one would it be?
It'd have to be A Perfect Spy because I can read it again and again and again.
Brilliant. And who would you like to hear next on Dead Drop 5? Whose selections would intrigue you, Oliver?
Well, I had it down to 2. And so I thought, on the one hand, it would be great to get my favorite Bond, who was Timothy Dalton. Sorry for including that without being asked.
Was that Roger Moore, did you say?
It was Timothy Dalton. I know you're a Roger Moore fan. I love Roger Moore as well. Yeah, but it would have to. But I think I would, if you can get him, he's played both Smiley and Jackson Lamb, Gary Oldman. If you could get Gary Oldman, that would be great.
That would be fantastic. I will try. I'll say Oliver sent me from Aspects of History. Gary, you need to come on the show.
The worst he can do is say no, Shane.
Yes. Or he could turn into his character Bexy from The Firm and terrify me. But
yes, indeed. He's capable of anything, really. But I'm sure we could get hold of his agent's email address. It's just a case of an email and he either says yes or no. So it's not that difficult, I would have thought.
That's it. And it was funny, we talk about Dalton and Roger Moore, and regular listeners know I'm a huge fan of Roger Moore. However, I was thinking the other day that had I not watched the movies as a kid and had I read Fleming later in life, Dalton would probably be my favourite actor to play.
Well, I always say Dalton's my favourite, but that's assuming that Sean Connery is number one and untouchable.
Right.
Because he is my favourite.
Right. Okay.
I was growing up in a time where Sean Connery was everyone's favourite. Yes. So it was always who's your second favourite, then becomes your favourite.
Well, a nice link to the Russia House there as well, with him playing a role in the Russia
exactly.
House.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But yeah, no, I just love Dalton because, I mean, I think The Living Daylights and License to Kill are both fantastic films anyway. In their own right, they're really, really good films. And that's sometimes not the case with the, I don't know. I don't want to upset any Spybrarians, but some of the latter few Bonds are not quite as up there, I don't think.
Hey, you're welcome to your opinion. That's what Spybury's all about. We're all spy fans and we love to hear from other people with different views. That's what makes the community so vibrant. And there are times when, you might pick up a book that you've never liked the author of before or like their work and you eventually enjoy it. So that's the beauty of what we do, right, Oliver?
I completely agree. I love going onto your website and listening to the episodes as well.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. I appreciate it. Where can people find out more about Aspects of History?
Well, you can find Aspects of History, the podcast. Just search for Aspects of History on wherever you get your podcasts. So we're, Spotify, Google, Apple, everything. And then the website, aspectsofhistory.com. And our magazine, we do annual subscriptions. And actually, I should speak to you, but I could be happy to do a discount for Spybury members where you could get an annual sub for us. But we have an online magazine, comes out in PDF every other month, so 6 issues a year. And it's got all the best historians that are out there write for us. So we've had Simon Sebag Montefiore, we've had Andrew Roberts, Dan Jones. The list is endless for numbers of historians who've contributed to our magazine. So,
well, as soon as we're done recording here, the first thing I'm going to do is sign up because I'm a history buff, love learning, love reading about history. I'm all over that. I also, and I don't want to blow smoke up your ear end here, but you've had some fantastic guests on Aspects of History. And that's how I first came to discover you, is through Twitter and sharing some of those. And as we said at the start of the show, there are a lot of Spybrarians who are interested in history as well. And what I would say to our budding writers is you've got to read this stuff. If you read Mick Smith's book, The Real Special Relationship, there are so many things you can riff off in there. There are so many things, and even Mick himself at one point said, if you were a Hollywood producer, you might think this stretches credibility, but it actually, the whole story of the fighter landing in the lake in West Berlin and us getting underneath to get the top secret gear off and then giving it back to there's so much in there. You think, as a writer, where can you go with this? And I think studying history will inspire our budding writers as well. That's my belief.
Definitely. I mean, yeah, I was saying this to an author I was interviewing recently, is there is a limitless supply of stories from history that you can draw on. And, whether your thing is spying or something else, monarchy, empire, all that kind of stuff, there's something for everyone.
There really is. Well, Oliver, thanks a million for coming on the show today. I really enjoyed your selections and picks, and excited for our Spybrarians to find Aspects of History as well, because I know we'll have a lot of interest from our listeners there. And for those of you who might be out there now evading your tail or seducing someone in a foreign territory, all the show notes will include the links from today, which is spybury.com/215. So until next time, stay safe out there, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Spybrary podcast. You don't have to wait for the next episode. Join the conversation happening now at facebook.com/Spybrary and on Twitter @Spybrary.